Curator-Prime Veth'raan had dedicated his entire life to the grand biological archive. For 214 standard cycles, he had served the Kortheen Collective's most sacred mission, the preservation and study of galactic biodiversity. Standing in the observation gallery of the Eternal Garden, gazing down at the hundreds of habitat domes that stretched across the massive biostation's interior, he felt the familiar warmth of purpose that had sustained him through the centuries. The Kortheen were a patient species, herbivorous and contemplative, with lifespans that stretched beyond what most younger races could comprehend. They had evolved on a garden world of gentle rains and abundant vegetation, and they viewed themselves as the galaxy's caretakers. Their grand biological archive was not merely a collection, Veth'raan believed, but a sacred trust. Within these domes lived representatives of over 300 species from across known space, each in carefully maintained habitats that replicated their home environments. Future generations would thank the collective for preserving this diversity, for maintaining living repositories of genetic and cultural information that might otherwise be lost to war, plague, or stellar catastrophe. This is what Veth'raan told himself as the scout ships transmitted their findings. A human colony vessel, the New Horizon, traveling through an unmonitored region of the outer veil. 847 individuals in cryosleep, families, scientists, engineers, children, all heading toward a distant star system to establish a new settlement, completely unaware that they were passing through space the Kortheen had quietly claimed for resource extraction. Humans. Veth'raan had studied them for decades through remote observation. A deathworld species from a planet that should have been classified as a hazard zone. They had evolved as persistent hunters on a world of extreme weather, aggressive predators, and environmental volatility. Yet somehow, impossibly, they had developed art, philosophy, science, and compassion. They were a contradiction that fascinated every xenobiologist in the collective. And now, by pure fortune, the archive would finally have living specimens. The interception was clean. Kortheen boarding teams, moving with practiced efficiency, transferred the cryopods from the New Horizon to specially prepared storage aboard the Eternal Garden. They scuttled the colony ship afterward, erasing evidence of the encounter. Within 3 standard days, Habitat Dome 7 had been transformed into a small human town, complete with buildings, parks, gardens, and a simulated Earth-like sky. Every detail had been researched and replicated. The humans would wake to comfort, not horror. Or so Veth'raan believed. Dr. Sarah Chen woke to the gentle chime of her cryopod's revival sequence, the same sound that should have signaled their arrival at New Terra. The familiar routine of revival proceeded normally: warming, oxygenation, the gradual return of sensation to her limbs. She opened her eyes expecting to see the colony ship's medical bay. Instead, she found herself staring at an unfamiliar ceiling of some crystalline material that seemed to glow with its own soft light. Panic struck immediately, the instinctive response of a mind recognizing wrongness. She sat up, her body protesting with the usual post-cryo stiffness, and looked around. She was in a small room, austere but comfortable, with furniture that seemed designed for humans but constructed from materials she didn't recognize. Through a window, she could see what appeared to be a street, buildings, even trees, all under a dome of that same luminous crystal. The door opened. Sarah's hand instinctively reached for a weapon she didn't have as a figure entered. It stood perhaps 7 feet tall, with 4 arms and skin that resembled smooth bark in varying shades of green and brown. Its face was almost plant-like, with large, gentle eyes and a mouth that seemed designed more for browsing vegetation than speech. "Please do not be alarmed," the creature said, and Sarah realized she was hearing it in perfect English, though its mouth movements didn't match the words. Translation technology. "I am Curator-Prime Veth'raan of the Kortheen Collective. You are safe and well cared for." "Where am I?" Sarah demanded, standing despite her body's protests. "Where is my family? Where is my ship?" "Your family is here and safe. All of your people survived the transfer successfully." Veth'raan's voice carried what might have been meant as reassurance. "You are aboard the Eternal Garden, the greatest biological archive in the known galaxy. You and your fellow humans have been selected to join our collection. You will be studied, cared for, and preserved for future generations. It is a great honor." Sarah stared at him, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. "Collection. We're not specimens, we're people, we're colonists. We have rights, we have a destination, we have—" "You have a new purpose now," Veth'raan interrupted gently. "I understand this is difficult to accept. Your species is known for strong emotional responses, but in time you will come to appreciate the honor of your position. You will want for nothing, your needs will be met, and you will contribute to the most important scientific endeavor in galactic history. I want to speak to my husband and daughter now. Of course, they are waking in adjacent quarters. You will all be brought together shortly for orientation." Sarah's training as a xenobiologist warred with her instincts as a mother and a human being. She had spent her career studying alien life, understanding their perspectives, finding common ground. But this was abduction, imprisonment. No matter how this creature dressed it up in noble language, they had been stolen. When she was reunited with Marcus and Maya an hour later in what the Kortheen called the Integration Center, she found her husband's face set in the carefully controlled expression he wore when he was furiously angry, and her daughter's eyes red from crying. Around them, other humans were gathering, hundreds of them, all wearing the same expressions of shock, rage, and disbelief. Marcus pulled Sarah and Maya close. "We're in a habitat dome on some kind of massive space station," he whispered. "I've been watching the guards. They're not carrying visible weapons, they move slowly, and there are only about 20 of them for all of us." "Don't," Sarah whispered back. "Not yet. We need information first." She was right, and Marcus knew it, though every instinct screamed at him to fight, to protect his family, to break free. He was an engineer, trained to solve problems, and this was a problem that required careful analysis before action. The orientation proceeded with surreal civility. Veth'raan and his fellow Kortheen explained the rules of the habitat, the resources available, the medical care they would receive. They seemed genuinely confused by the humans' hostility, as if they truly could not understand why their captives were not grateful for the honor of imprisonment. When James Rodriguez, a former colonial marine who had been traveling with his wife and 2 sons, demanded to know if they would ever be released, Veth'raan's answer was delivered with what the Kortheen probably thought was kindness. "Release? To where? Your colony ship is gone. Earth is months away by the fastest communication, years by ship. And even if we could return you, why would we? You are invaluable specimens, the only living humans in the archive. We cannot risk losing you." That night, as the Kortheen's simulated darkness fell over the habitat, Sarah lay awake in the quarters they had been assigned, listening to Maya's breathing from the next room and feeling Marcus's tension beside her. She knew what he was thinking because she was thinking it too. They had to escape. But how? They were prisoners on a space station, surrounded by technology centuries beyond their own, with no weapons, no ships, and no way to contact Earth. What the Kortheen did not understand, what they could not understand from their remote observations and academic studies, was that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their weapons. It was their absolute refusal to accept the unacceptable, coupled with a terrifying capacity for patience, planning, and coordinated action when necessary. The first month was the hardest. The humans had to appear broken, or at least resigned, while secretly organizing. Sarah took the lead in this, leveraging her experience as a researcher to understand her captors. She volunteered to work with Veth'raan, claiming that since she could not continue her own xenobiological career, she might as well contribute to his work. Veth'raan was delighted. Here was proof that humans could adapt, could see reason. He spent hours with Sarah, showing her the archive's other specimens, explaining the Kortheen's methodology, their security systems, their technology. He thought he was teaching her about preservation and science. He did not realize she was conducting reconnaissance. Sarah learned that the Eternal Garden was truly massive, a biostation the size of a small moon, with hundreds of habitat domes connected by service tunnels and transport tubes. She learned that the Kortheen were pacifists by nature, that they had not fought a war in over 3,000 years, that their security personnel were trained to manage distressed specimens but had no experience with actual combat. She learned the layout of the station, the locations of the hangar bays, the communications arrays, the power distribution centers. And she learned that in 6 months, the collective's leadership would gather on the Eternal Garden for their annual Grand Symposium, a week-long conference that would bring together the most important Kortheen from across their territory. Security would actually be lighter in the habitats during this time, as guards would be redirected to protect the symposium guests. 6 months. They had 6 months to prepare. Marcus assembled a team of engineers and fabricators, carefully selected from among the 847 humans in the habitat. They began to pilfer materials, slowly and methodically. A tool here during a maintenance request. Metal components from furniture that could be replaced with wooden alternatives. Electronic parts from entertainment devices, explained away as accidental damage. In the basement levels of their habitat, in spaces the Kortheen rarely monitored because they assumed humans would avoid the uncomfortable underground areas, they established workshops. What they built would have impressed any military engineer. Stunners fashioned from modified power cells and wiring. Cutting tools created from stolen maintenance equipment. Lockpicks crafted from scavenged metal. Communication jammers reverse-engineered from the translation, devices every human had been fitted with. Nothing lethal, Marcus insisted. They would not give the galaxy a reason to see them as monsters, but they would be armed. Rodriguez took on a different task. He organized combat training, disguised as cultural activities. Martial arts classes, he explained to curious Kortheen observers, were an important part of human wellness. Historical reenactment of various fighting styles was educational. Endurance training framed as sports. The Kortheen watched with scientific interest, documenting these fascinating human behaviors, never realizing they were watching their prisoners prepare for war. And Maya, brilliant Maya who had inherited her mother's intellect and her father's technical aptitude, she became the key to everything. Teenagers, the Kortheen had observed, were a unique phase of human development, prone to emotional volatility but also remarkable adaptability. They underestimated these young humans completely. Maya and a group of other teenagers, working with the kind of obsessive focus that only young people on a mission can achieve, hacked into the habitat's computer systems. It took them 4 months of patient work, but they succeeded in creating a backdoor, giving them access to security cameras, door controls, environmental systems, and most importantly, the connection points to the station's main network. As the 6th month approached, the humans held their final planning session. They gathered in the community center building. 847 people crowded into a space designed for maybe 300, and Maya's team activated their jammers, blocking the Kortheen's surveillance for what they promised would be a 30-minute window. Sarah stood before her people, these families and scientists and engineers and children who had been stolen from their future. "We have one chance," she said. "The symposium starts in 4 days. We move on the second night when they're comfortable, when they think the event is proceeding normally. We have 7 primary objectives that must be taken simultaneously." She outlined the plan. Teams would move on the security station, the hangar bay, the communications center, the symposium hall, the central environmental controls, the power distribution nexus, and the other specimen habitats. Each team had a leader, a backup leader, and specific assignments. They would use non-lethal force. They would move fast, and they would not stop until the entire station was under human control. "What if it doesn't work?" someone asked. Marcus answered that one. "Then we'll be prisoners who tried to escape instead of prisoners who accepted captivity. But I'd rather die free than live in a cage, and I don't think we're going to die. I think we're going to win." The vote was unanimous. The night of the revolt, Veth'raan was in the symposium hall, enjoying a meal with his fellow curators and discussing the latest findings from the human habitat. The specimens were adapting remarkably well, he reported. Some had even begun to show interest in contributing to the archive's research. It was a breakthrough that suggested their methodology was sound. that even species as volatile as humans could come to understand the importance of the collective's work. He never saw it coming. At exactly midnight by human reckoning, Maya's fingers flew across the interface she and her team had spent months building. Throughout Habitat Dome 7, security cameras went dark, door locks disengaged, alarms failed to sound, and in 7 different locations across the habitat, teams of humans burst into action with military precision. Rodriguez led the assault on the security station. His team of 20, all moving with the kind of speed that evolution on a high-gravity deathworld had gifted them, covered the distance from their staging area to the station in seconds. The Kortheen guards, used to decades of peaceful duty watching over docile specimens, barely had time to register what was happening before they were struck by stun blasts and zip-tied with improvised restraints. Rodriguez secured the station's weapons locker, finding a variety of tools meant for managing distressed specimens: tranquilizer guns, force barriers, containment equipment. He distributed them to his team and opened a channel to the other groups. Security station secure. No casualties. Proceeding to secondary objectives. At the hangar bay, Marcus and his engineering team faced a more complex challenge. The bay was massive, containing dozens of small craft and several larger vessels, but the Kortheen had locked down all the ship systems. Marcus had anticipated this. While half his team secured the bay's control room, stunning the handful of technicians on duty, the other half began physically accessing the ship systems, bypassing software locks with hardware modifications. It would take time, but they would have functional spacecraft before the night was over. Sarah led the team assigned to the communications center, the heart of the station's ability to call for help. Her background as a scientist made her the perfect choice for this delicate operation. The Kortheen communications officer on duty, a young curator named Shentel, looked up in confusion as humans flooded into the room. "I'm sorry," Sarah told him as her team secured the center. "But you need to understand we're not specimens. We're people, and people don't accept cages." She stunned him before he could reach the distress beacon, a mercy she knew he might not have shown if their situations were reversed. Yuki Tanaka, a systems engineer who had worked on Earth's deep space communication networks, immediately began analyzing the Kortheen systems. They were sophisticated, far beyond human technology in many ways, but the underlying principles were similar. She would crack this. She had to. But the most audacious operation was happening at the symposium hall itself. A team of 50 humans, led by a former security consultant named David Akafar, sealed all the exits to the grand chamber where the collective's leadership was dining. The Kortheen inside, including Veth'raan, suddenly found themselves locked in with no communication, no guards, and surrounded by the primitive specimens they had collected. The panic was immediate. The Kortheen were not a warlike species. They had no experience with being threatened, with being trapped, with being at the mercy of others. Veth'raan watched as his fellow curators backed away from the doors, clustering together in fear, their forearms raised in gestures of submission. David's voice, amplified through a commandeered translator, echoed through the hall. "You will not be harmed if you cooperate. You will be treated better than you treated us. But understand this clearly, your station is ours now. Your security is ours. Your ships are ours. We took it all in 6 hours. 6 hours. That was how long the entire operation took." By the time the artificial sun rose over Habitat Dome 7, humans controlled every critical system on the Eternal Garden. Rodriguez's teams had secured the power distribution centers, ensuring the Kortheen couldn't shut down life support to any habitat in an attempt to force surrender. Other teams had begun opening the other specimen domes, offering freedom to species who had been imprisoned just as the humans had been. A species of methane breathers, taken from their homeworld a decade earlier, emerged from their habitat in confusion, and then joy as humans explained what was happening and offered them ships to return home. A group of crystalline entities who communicated through light patterns joined the revolt enthusiastically, their natural abilities allowing them to disable Kortheen computer systems with electromagnetic pulses. Other species chose to remain neutral, too frightened or too adapted to captivity to take action. The humans respected their choices. By the end of that first day, the Eternal Garden was no longer a prison. It was a liberated zone under human administration, and the Kortheen were the ones in confinement, held in their own symposium hall under guard by the very specimens they had thought helpless. Veth'raan sat on the floor of the hall, his people around him, and tried to understand what had happened. The humans had been in captivity for 6 months. 6 months. How had they organized this? How had they learned the station's systems? How had they moved with such coordination, such precision? His entire worldview was crumbling. These were supposed to be specimens, fascinating but ultimately controllable. Instead, they had proven to be something he had never anticipated, warriors and tacticians who had simply been waiting for the right moment to strike. Sarah came to speak with him that evening. She found him still sitting in the same spot, looking lost in a way that made her feel an unexpected pang of sympathy. He was, she realized, a true believer who had just discovered his religion was built on evil. "I need you to understand something," she told him, sitting down cross-legged on the floor in front of him, ignoring the protests of the human guards who thought she was getting too close to a potential threat. "We're not monsters. We don't want to hurt you. But we will never, ever accept captivity. That's not a human trait, Veth'raan. That's a trait of any truly sentient species. The capacity to choose freedom over comfort, dignity over safety. You studied us like we were animals. You never asked if we wanted to be here. That was your mistake." "But the archive," Veth'raan said, his voice broken. "The preservation of knowledge, of genetic diversity, of culture." "You could have asked," Sarah interrupted. "If you had come to Earth, explained your mission, offered partnership instead of imprisonment, thousands of humans would have volunteered to live here and be studied. We love learning. We love contributing to science. But you didn't ask. You took. And that's the difference between science and slavery." Over the following weeks, the humans established a functioning administration of the Eternal Garden. They maintained life support for all the habitats. They continued to care for species who had nowhere else to go, providing them with food and safety. They treated their Kortheen prisoners with dignity, providing them with good food, comfortable quarters, and medical care. They allowed Veth'raan and his fellow curators to observe the station's operations, to see how humans were managing the complex biosystems, often improving on Kortheen designs. Marcus led the engineering efforts to repair and upgrade systems that had been neglected or poorly designed. Maya and her team established a new security network that respected privacy while maintaining safety. Rodriguez organized a militia to keep order and protect against any potential rescue attempts by Kortheen military forces, though none came. The collective, it seemed, was paralyzed with indecision, unable to comprehend how to respond to a situation where their precious biostation was occupied by specimens. Sarah continued her conversations with Veth'raan. It became a daily ritual. She would bring him reports of the station's operations, and they would discuss philosophy, ethics, and the nature of sentience. Slowly, painfully, Veth'raan began to understand. The archive was not noble, it was not preservation. It was theft of the highest order, the theft of autonomy from thinking beings. "How do I make this right?" he asked her one day, 3 months into the occupation. "How do I atone?" "You start by telling your people the truth," Sarah said. "You tell them that every species you've collected deserves to go home if they want to. You tell them that science requires consent. And you help us establish a new framework, one where species cooperate voluntarily instead of being imprisoned." On the communications front, Yuki had made a breakthrough. She had cracked the Kortheen encryption protocols and established a clear transmission path to Earth. The message she sent was comprehensive. Their location, their situation, the details of the Kortheen's operation, and a simple request: "Come get us." The transmission would take months to reach Earth at faster-than-light speeds. In the meantime, the humans waited, maintained the station, and prepared for the inevitable confrontation. 15 months after the revolt, human warships finally arrived. The USS Indomitable and her battle group dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system, their sensors immediately locking onto the Eternal Garden. Admiral Jessica Okonkwo, a veteran of Earth's colonial defense force, had expected to find her people dead or in desperate condition. She had come prepared for a rescue mission, possibly a recovery operation. What she found instead was her people broadcasting from the station's main communications array, alive, healthy, and very much in control of the situation. Admiral Okonkwo, this is Dr. Sarah Chen, representing the 847 humans of the New Horizon, the transmission began. We are safe and secure. We have occupied this facility for over 12 months. We have liberated multiple species and established humanitarian operations. We have demands before we will return control of this station to the Kortheen Collective. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Okonkwo found herself torn between pride, relief, and astonishment. Her people hadn't just survived, they had conquered. The Kortheen home fleet, which had moved to intercept the human warships, found itself in an impossible position. They couldn't attack without risking damage to the Eternal Garden. They couldn't negotiate from strength because the humans held all the cards. And when Admiral Okonkwo's response was broadcast across all channels, they realized they had lost completely. Kortheen Collective, this is Admiral Jessica Okonkwo of the United Earth Space Command. I am here to retrieve my people and to ensure justice is served. You have kidnapped human citizens, imprisoned them against their will, and attempted to treat sentient beings as specimens. These are acts of war. However, my people have requested that I negotiate rather than simply destroy your fleet and take what is ours, so you will listen carefully to our terms. The terms were comprehensive and non-negotiable. The immediate release of all specimens in Kortheen facilities across the galaxy, with full reparations and transportation home. The permanent shutdown of the collection program. A requirement that the collective petition each species individually for permission to study them, with full informed consent and the right to refuse. Formal apologies to every species imprisoned. The establishment of a galactic treaty defining the rights of sentient beings, and reparations to humanity specifically, paid in technology, resources, and a permanent prohibition against Kortheen vessels entering human space without explicit permission. The galaxy watched as the crisis unfolded. Other species, discovering that they too had people imprisoned in Kortheen facilities, added their voices to humanity's demands. The collective, facing united opposition and the clear evidence of human capability, had no choice but to capitulate completely. Veth'raan was allowed to speak with Sarah one final time before the humans departed. He looked older somehow, though Kortheen aged slowly. The weight of understanding what he had done, what his life's work had truly been, had broken something in him. I thought I was preserving, he said quietly. I thought I was protecting. I know, Sarah replied, and she meant it. You weren't evil, Veth'raan, you were wrong, there's a difference. You can still be a scientist. You just have to remember that we're all people first, specimens never. If you want to study us, any of us, ask. You'll find that most species can be very generous when they're treated with respect. The departure of the humans from the Eternal Garden was a coordinated operation involving multiple Earth vessels. Families were reunited with the civilization they had been stolen from. Heroes returned home to parades and celebrations. The story of the occupation spread across human space, becoming legend almost immediately. Maya Chen, now 17 years old, became the youngest person ever to address the United Earth Assembly. She spoke about her experience, about the months of planning, about watching her parents and their fellow prisoners transform captivity into victory. She became an activist for sentient rights across the galaxy, working to establish treaties and protections that would prevent any species from suffering what humanity had endured. Marcus Chen was recruited by Earth's defense forces to help design new security protocols for human colonies. The techniques they had used to take the Eternal Garden became required study for every colonial defense force officer. His philosophy was simple. Humans should never be vulnerable to capture again, and if captured, they should always be capable of liberating themselves. James Rodriguez returned to active duty in the Colonial Marines, his rank restored, and his reputation enhanced by his leadership during the revolt. He trained the next generation of Marines, using the biostation takeover as the ultimate case study in asymmetric warfare. His classes were always full, and his students always eager to learn how a few hundred civilians had defeated an advanced alien civilization. Sarah Chen returned to her research, but with a new focus. She established the Institute for Interspecies Ethics, dedicated to ensuring that scientific study of alien life was conducted with full consent and respect for sentient rights. Veth'raan, seeking redemption, became one of her first collaborators, helping to draft guidelines that the galactic community eventually adopted. On Earth's moon, visible from the homeworld that the New Horizons passengers had left behind, a monument was erected. The memorial to the New Horizon listed all 847 names and included a simple plaque. They were taken to be studied. They taught the galaxy a lesson instead. Humanity bows to no cage. 6 months after the resolution of the crisis, Admiral Okonkwo stood before the Galactic Council, which had invited humanity to join as full members. The chamber was packed with representatives from hundreds of species, many of whom were still processing what humanity had done. Some viewed humans with respect, others with fear, all with a new understanding that humanity was not to be trifled with. Okonkwo's speech was brief, but it resonated across the galaxy. You've asked what humanity brings to the galactic community. We bring the same thing we brought to the Eternal Garden, the absolute conviction that freedom is not negotiable, that sentience demands respect, and that we will cross any distance, overcome any obstacle to protect our people and defend the rights of all thinking beings. Test us on this if you wish. The Kortheen collective did. She paused, letting the silence stretch. Ask them how it turned out. The vote to admit humanity to the Council was unanimous. Not because every species loved humans, but because every species understood that humanity had proven something fundamental about themselves. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the most technologically advanced. They were not the oldest or the wisest, but they were free. And they would ensure that every other sentient being in the galaxy had the right to be free as well, whether those beings wanted human help or not. The Eternal Garden still existed, but it had been transformed. Now it operated as a voluntary research station, where species from across the galaxy could come to study and be studied, to share knowledge and learn from each other. Humans maintained a permanent presence there, not as specimens, but as administrators and scientists, a reminder of what had happened and a promise that it would never happen again. And in the habitat that had once been Dome 7, now redesignated as Freedom Hall, a single plaque marked the spot where Sarah Chen had stood before her people and outlined the plan that changed everything. The inscription was simple in both English and Galactic Common. We were 847 humans, stolen from our future and imprisoned in a cage. We took 18 months to show the galaxy what humanity truly means. Not violence, not conquest, but the unbreakable will to be free and the capability to make that freedom real. Remember this, humanity kneels to no one. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see Freedom Hall, to stand where the revolt had been planned, to understand the lesson that humanity had taught. Some came to honor the courage of the humans. Others came to study the tactics they had used. But all came away with the same understanding. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and the galaxy would never be the same.